Hi everyone, how are you? In this lecture, I'm just going to talk a little bit about I'm going to talk a lot about the facial expression exercise, and just show you some of the things that I'm looking for this exercise, and hopefully you'll find these little tips and tricks interesting. Um, You'll be using the Max Rig character if you want. If you want to use another rig, you're more than welcome to find one and use that. The Max Rig is pretty limited, but I think that the limitations are a good thing. With some of these facial rigs that you get thousands of controls, and it can become quite arduous trying to figure out how to use certain rigs. So even though the Max Rig is limited, I think you'll be able to do some interesting pieces. So anyway, I thought we'd just start with the idea of or talk about the idea of how facial expressions are formed, and it comes about because we've got all of these muscles that are on the face and in our neck, and they relate to one another. So whenever you feel something internally, it translates into an expression on your face. So if you're tense for whatever reason, or angry, your neck muscles will start to tighten, your jaw muscles will start to tighten, and all of these other muscles in your face will react to what you're feeling. And there's 7,000 distinct expressions, which is pretty amazing. But we have so many muscles in our face. The combination of how those muscles are triggered will give us very subtle facial expressions. Now, obviously, in animation, we can't do all of those. We've got all these micro expressions. We try to put those in wherever we can, but for the most part, we really only use, a few dozen facial expressions. So the eyes are the most important part of the facial expression, for me anyway. And the reason for that is that that's the first place that the viewer looks. When you're a baby, when you're born, if you've got children, you'll notice that as when they were babies, the only thing that they looked at were your eyes. They were constantly just fixated on eyes. They didn't really look at any other part of the body. In the first 4 weeks to 3 months, I'd say, they're just fixated with eyes, and I think that has just progressed as we get older. That's the first place that we always look at. So it's pretty important. So what happens is, we get a lot of information from what's happening in the eyeballs. The way that the eyelids are situated, or the way that they're cutting through the eyeball, will mean different things. And also the way that the brows work in relation to the eyelids. Okay, and that is quite an important thing that we have to remember when creating the eyes. The other part of the body which is quite important is the hands. Because whatever's happening upstairs, meaning whatever you're thinking, whatever the character is thinking, is often shown through the eyes. Okay, but then you can also get a good indication as to what the character is thinking through the hand gestures. So if they're aggressive, or if they're relaxed, or if they're whatever they're feeling, that feeling will normally be represented in the hands as well. Oh, sorry about the slide. So we always have to think of rhythm and flow in our poses, and especially when it comes to doing our facial expressions. So here you've got Tim Lockwood. You can see here that with the brows, what I like to do whenever I'm constructing the brow poses is think of them as a single piece. Okay, so like this big long caterpillar. See how they're kind of connected? It's a lot more appealing if they do have that kind of flow, that rhythm. And this is a good exercise. This is just a chart that shows you how an artist has designed all of these different facial expressions. But one of the things that I just wanted to point out is that if we go back to the sense of flow and rhythm, if you notice how most of these anyway, the brows all feel like they're connected. They all kind of flow through one another. Okay, you can see it through here. They all kind of flow. This one here kind of flows through. There's a couple. Where's one that's kind of broken? This one here. You know, they've broken the flow, but pretty much what I'm looking for is the feeling that they're connected. And the reason for that is that, you know, we've got these muscles that are right above our nose there that are moving the inner brow. This is what we would call the inner brow, just this part right here. And then you've got your outer brow and you've got your mid brow right in the middle there. Well, the inner brow has a muscle, or has a couple of muscles actually, or series of muscles, and that is one of the most important places for indicating how a character is feeling. If they're angry, these will be down. You know, let's see if we can find an angry. Yeah, something like this. You'll notice that they're down. If they're concerned or worried, they'll start to curve up. If it's kind of a sultry sort of look, you'll notice that, you know, we've got these fantastic brows here that are lifted, but they're also just a little bit relaxed. So the inners are just kind of bowing down just a fraction. But wherever there's some sort of tenseness to it, you'll notice that the shape of the inner brows is it's quite forced. So you can see that this one here is all the way down. This one here, you know, it's all the way down as well. This one here is kind of a cool one. You know, you get that real feeling that all of these muscles are kind of contracting into the middle of the face, you know, showing that pressure. And we've got this nice little inner lifted with the mids and the outers straight. Now, understanding the way that brows work, it does take a little bit of time, but one of the other things that I just wanted to mention is that in most cases, whenever I'm trying to form my my facial expressions, I'm looking at the way the marriage between the brow and the lid shape. So the way that the top lid and the bottom lid flow, or they feel like they have this sense of rhythm as well. So a perfect example of this one is if I have a look at this one down here, you'll notice that the brow and all of these lines feel like they have a sense of flow or sense of rhythm, okay? Or they're almost parallel to each other, right? So they feel like they're connected. This one here is a good example as well. So this lid and brow, the brow has come all the way down over the eye, is flowing on through, but you get this nice scoop. The bottom lid is also scooping in the same direction as the top lid and the top brow. This expression down here, you notice that we've got this nice soft curve on the top lid. There's also this same sort of curve on the bottom lid, and then the curve is flowing in the same direction on the top lid there. So it all feels like it's connected. The distance between the brow and the lid really depends on the expression. So the more, you can notice here that with the more pressure that's coming from the expression, meaning that all the muscles are converging into the nose area, then maybe the lower the brow is, but not necessarily, not all the time. Another key point that I wanted to mention is that, you know, if you look at this expression over here, so the character is looking camera right, but notice how large the eyeball is on this on the eye that's facing the direction, meaning we're looking this way. So this eye is bigger and this eye here is smaller. This is a trick that a lot of animators use, which is I'm looking in this direction, so I'm going to create this triangle so that this side is larger and it gets smaller on this side over here. So all of this kind of converges over this point here if I'm looking over in this direction. If I was looking over in this direction, it would be inverse. Okay, so the eye on this side would be larger. I would create this kind of triangle shape so that it is definitely apparent that I'm looking in that direction. Okay, you can notice it's a little bit larger on this one over here, and that's a nice one, but that's a nice little trick that the animators do. You notice how the eye is just a fraction larger? Another thing that you need to think about is where the lid sits or cuts through the pupil of the eye. So depending on what the character's feeling, if they're feeling tired or sleepy or even sultry, then the eyelid is going to cut through the eye. And you also need to take note of how much white you'll see underneath the pupil. So in this case, you get this real sense of, the eye is sagging. There's a real sense of weight. This bottom eyelid is really hanging down low, which means, that's why we're seeing so much of the bottom of the whites of the eyes. But how much white you see around the pupil can also relate to how scared a character is or how angry a character is. So in this case here, you'll notice that we can see quite a lot of white underneath the eye, and the brows are really cutting through the pupil there, helping sell this idea that the character is very aggressive or angry. Now, if a character is smiling, then the eyelids will normally lift up and start to intersect through the pupil. Okay, but the top eyelid might also show a lot more white above the pupil there. Okay, so you really have to start to pay attention of what's happening with the rest of the face and how that relates to what's going to happen in the eyes. Okay, anyway, that's enough of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So as an animator, deciding what facial expressions you have to use, it can be quite a challenging experience. Because often what will happen is that you'll get a line of dialogue and you'll have to animate to it. One of the best ways that I know is to get a camera and rehearse the line and say the line to the camera and really just get a sense of what the character is feeling and look at what I've shot and see if it reads correctly. If it doesn't read correctly, then I'll go back and I'll reshoot it again. But often what you want is we want there to be a sense of truth in the facial expression, meaning that it should be clearly understood what the character is feeling through the facial performance. Now, here's a great article that was in Vanity Fair. It's in the culture section, and what they did is they got a series of very well-known actors. They gave them just one or two lines that described who their character was and what they were feeling. And this was just an exercise for these guys to read the line and then just do a facial expression which clearly illustrated who that character was and what they were feeling at the time. And I won't go through these. You can read these and have a look at these in your own time. But if you have a look at these facial expressions, the thing that I'm first drawn to are the eyes. You can see here we've got these nice manic eyes. You can see the whites above the pupil, the way that the bottom lid is kind of intersecting through the pupil. And that's because if you look at his cheeks, you'll see that the cheeks is this tenseness, which is kind of pushing up in this direction here. So all of this area is like elevating through, and it's pushing up into that eye, into the pupil there. There's this really straight, kind of rigid brow feeling there. That's pretty important to this expression. It's not an aggressive. He's not angry. It's almost a sense of joy in some ways. And if you read the expression down here, you'll kind of see what I mean. So internally, he's happy, but he's also manic and aggressive and fierce, and there's this psychotic sort of nature to it, but also this joy at the same time. So we're almost mixing these two ideas or these two expressions together. To create this really cool looking facial expression. You'll notice how tense the teeth are. There's this clenching of the jaw, and that really helps illustrate internally what this Marine is feeling at the moment. And then this one over here is really interesting. Look, if we go back to the eye, you'll notice how the brow just, it kind of flows on through into this brow here, but this one here is different. It's elevated just a little bit. There's a tiny bit of asymmetry, well, actually quite a significant amount of asymmetry in this one compared to this one here. They're pretty similar. This one here, it's pretty similar as well. But the brow is a little bit different, but the lids feel like they're a little bit more symmetrical. So the distance of space between this brow here and that lid is a lot shorter, or a lot less than the distance from this one, from that top lid to this one here. And quite often, this elevated eyebrow indicates that a character is thinking something. It's like, So this is a thought indicator for us. Also, the nice relaxed smile in the face relates really well to what he's thinking. But the way that the eyes are constructed that's what's important for this one. The way that the lid just kind of cuts through the pupil. Okay, so it cuts almost halfway through. This is pretty low, but this relaxed sort of feeling, with the lids coming all the way through and intersecting through the pupil, which doesn't happen very often. You'll notice how much we see the pupil in this one. We see the whole black of the pupil on these eyes here. The lid still cuts through, but it cuts through the iris, but you can see that it's just sitting above the pupil here, whereas this one, it's cutting all the way through. And we're seeing the bottom lids are a little bit more relaxed, so they're also touching the bottom of the pupil. So it's the distance that the lids are either touching the pupil or the way that they intersect the pupil, which is really important. And if we come back to this one, you can feel the weight. There is just this, everything is just kind of hanging. The lids are hanging. The face, the jaw is drooped, but his mouth is closed, and there's this real sense of worry here. The way that the brows are kind of hanging down, on the outers are just kind of hanging. There's this real sense of concern here. And with these again, if we have a look at the way that the brows are kind of shaped, the way that they kind of flow on through. This one here is aggression. We can see that the brows are on their way down. So there is a little bit of anger there, but it's really just intensity. And so the brows, the inners are down, but the outers are up. Okay, and they're also elevated. Okay, you can see how high the brows are in relation to the lids. If the character was really angry, then there would be this sense of pressure which would be converging into the nose, which would mean that these brows would be cutting quite low, like this one over here. See how low they are? Would be really low to the tops of the lids. But in this case, he's not angry. So you really have to understand what the character is feeling, so that you can have an idea of how to construct that facial expression. The other thing that I love about this is just the scale, the stretch in the face. Everything is feeling stretched. The brows, the eyes are up, the nose even feels like it's stretched, the jaw is all the way down, compared with this one, where you really get the sense of, he's just hanging his head down. He feels terrible. And so there's just this weight, sinking feeling in everything. Okay. Also, how old the character is also going to relate to what sort of facial expression you're going to be doing. In this case here, sorry, can't see what. So anyway, this one here, he's watching he's a young boy who lives in an apartment block, and he's just thrown the ball out the window, and his little dog has jumped out the window to chase the ball. So his dog has just jumped out the window to its death, and so this little boy, this is his expression as he's watching his dog leap out the window to get the ball. in which case, you have to act like a 10-year-old boy. This might not be the sort of expression that a grown man would do in that situation, or he could do. It might be a very primal sort of expression, but he's put himself in that space of a 10-year-old boy. And once again, the way that the lids, are situated above or below the pupil, and the way the space between the lids and the brows, that's what's important for this piece here. And then vice versa for this one here. You can see how we're seeing the underneath the whites of the eye. Normally, if you want to show a character who's very aggressive, who means business, the more whites that you see under the eye, that's probably what you'll try to design. Whereas, in this case where you're bargaining with someone, or trying to appeal to their better nature, or even this one here where you're really surprised, you're going to see a little bit more whites above the pupil and the iris. And so this is really just to kind of show you how these muscles and everything are connected. Like if you look at the brows, when the eye is looking down, the lids will also cover a little bit more of the pupil. Okay, and then when you're looking up, you can see how much white's underneath the eye. But you'll notice that the movement in the brow as well when we move the eye. Okay. This is what I was talking about before, where we actually have a facial expression where we're smiling, or there's some sort of reason for the sides of or the cheeks to go up like this. It could be smiling, or it could just be an insane sort of look. But because all of this is connected to what's happening in here, when we push these muscles up, it shoots all of these muscles up as well. And so that's the reason why we start to intersect a little bit. Well, we start to actually, touch on the bottom of the pupil there. It's also kind of cool, just seeing the tops of the whites of the eye, and also, the distance between the lid and this one here, because this feels a little bit more manic, a little bit more forced, and not natural. And it probably isn't natural. I mean, she's just doing this because she's been told, this is the sort of facial expression you have to do. So, when you actually are smiling for real, there's the facial expression of pure joy is a lot different to something which is forced and looks like this. Normally what it is you'll see that there's a lot more crow's feet. All of this area here gets really scrunched up, and there's a lot of definition there when we are when we're incredibly happy, and you can tell a fake smile from a real smile just by the information underneath the eyelids here and in the crow's feet. So this is definitely a fake smile. A little bit more relaxed. You can see it's kind of cool with the lids really hanging low. Yeah, we're just getting back into the brows. So when you start to feel more angry, the brows will actually start to get closer to the eyelids there. Okay, a little bit more relaxed. This is cool. This is quite important actually. So you'll notice that when we start to move the face around, we get this cool rhythm. The nose bends, goes all the way through the lips, and then through the chin. And in a lot of animation, we use this kind of bending so that we have an asymmetrical shape, something which is really interesting. You don't want your face to always be straight up and down where it's symmetrical on both sides, because it's kind of boring. So we want to form something which is really appealing. So this is kind of cool. Now, if I was to be looking sideways, remember that I would have this eye a lot larger and maybe squint this one just a little bit smaller so that it helped, show that I was looking in that direction. And another thing with the lips is, wherever possible, try to make them asymmetrical. Just to mix it up a little bit. Maybe one side is slightly higher than the other one, then they shouldn't be exactly the same. But if one side is slightly higher, then is that because the jaw is maybe over, one side? But remember, you don't want to just do things arbitrarily. You want everything to feel connected, that there's a reason why the jaw is moving over to the side and why that side is elevated. So the trick to it is find some really good reference for it. So with this one, you'll notice that when the brows are up, the eyelid there also lifted. Okay, because all of this is connected. It's this motion, there's all these muscles that are elevating this area up here, but then because all of these muscles are moving, it's going to be dragging these muscles up as well. These ones here might also be dragged up. They could start to cut through the eye, but in this case, the person is, if you try that expression, you can feel that the bottom eyelids are actually pulling down against the top eyelids and the brows that are moving up. Okay, so we're trying to open our eyes, and it's like, oh, really? You know, it's that sort of expression. Really? Huh. So this is what I was talking about before with muscle pressure. You know, when you feel this sort of expression, you really do have to take note as to what's happening with all of these muscles. Everything's kind of converging in on this area. And you can see here that there's this pressure for these brow muscles to be coming into this area here. But also what happens is the eyelid muscles, they start to converge. The nose crinkles up and elevates, and you get all of these furrows in the nose here, as well as these muscles up here. Obviously, we don't have control of the cheeks in the Max rig, so you don't need to worry about it, but I thought I'd just mention it anyway. And once again, you know, these muscles, the way that these kind of contract. So we've got these muscles contracting down in this direction here, but also we've got these elevated ones happening here. So what will happen with these mid-brows is that they will kind of dip down just a little bit, while the inner brows will lift up just a little bit. So you'll get these kind of cool scoops happening. Okay, once again, just showing this idea of pressure. You know, everything is coming down into this part here, but also you get this real tenseness which is happening in the jaw. There's this real sort of, you know, firm aggression that happens in the side of the mouth down here. So the shape of the mouth, you should really feel those muscles in play. This is a great one. You know, the stink eye sort of look, just seeing how much white you see under the eye, the downward pressure of the brows, you know, how close they are to the tops of the lid. But then also, because this character is feeling, you know, so much aggression, can you see how the sides of the mouth are forced in? Okay, they're not relaxed, they're not out to the side, they're not a normal mouth, but there's this real pressure where everything is kind of converging in this area here, but also everything is kind of converging into the tips of his lips there. Right in this point here, all of this is like coming inwards. So, you know, if you were to do this pose here, you have to take into account what's happening with the sides, or in some cases what we call the corners of the mouth. I like the asymmetry of the lip, but also he's giving us a stink eye as well. He's not impressed. Yeah, neither is she. And, you know, this is kind of cool. So the jaw is off to the side. There's a little bit of asymmetry in the shape of the mouth. A little bit more pressure. But also the scale of the mouth I find interesting with this one. Just how large it is. And especially down the bottom here, it's kind of hanging. We've got this nice straight, what I call straights and curves. So we've got a curve down here, but this is relatively straight. Anyway, so, you know, we've got to keep the mouth shape simple but interesting. So you try to make the shapes asymmetrical, and we're thinking of straights versus curves. So simplifying it, and not that you might not be able to have this sort of control, but this is something that we think about. Simplifying, you know, our shapes, so straight and a curve, or these are quite interesting too. These beautiful asymmetrical shapes here. Just mixing it up a little bit, adding a little bit of roll or twist in the jaw. Once again, one side being a little bit more elevated than the other side. But of course, you know, with the Max rig, you're not going to be able to do too much with this, but you should try to add some sort of interesting pose which feels in the mouth, which feels connected to what's happening upstairs there. And one way of doing that is using these this idea of everything kind of converging in on one side. So imagine that there's a point of convergence over here, and all of these parts of the body, oh sorry, of the face, are kind of converging in on that one part over here. Okay, so it's really important to analyze the way that something is being structured. You'll notice that because this is all converging over in this side over here, there's this pressure. So this eye here is smaller, or sorry, more closed than this one here. This one here is just a little bit more open. And also the way that this line kind of flows on through to that point of convergence. The same with this one over here. So we've got this point of convergence. It's all coming over in this direction over here. And whenever an animator is thinking of forming these facial expressions, they are thinking of the way that everything is tied together in the face. I'll just show you some of my favorite artists. This is Glenn Keane, very good Disney animator, and I just love the expression on the face. Just this heaviness to it. You can see that there's a little bit of concern. The way that we know that there's concern is that how high the top lid is in relation to where it sits on the pupil and the iris there. The inner brow just gently lifted up. Okay, so you really get a sense that there's something troubling her, the way that the mouth is hanging down. So there's all this information there that is clearly showing what this character is feeling. This is kind of a cool one. It's a little bit crazy, but it's got these nice sort of connected, very severe curve in the brows there. But once again, we've got everything kind of converging in on this side over here. Okay, so the brows and even the bottom of the mouth are just converging on this point here. If you want to, definitely have a look at the way that Disney animators choose their facial expressions or pose their facial expressions. They put a lot of time and effort into these, and it's all about exaggeration as well. You don't want to go with anything that's too subtle. You want to try to ham it up as much as possible and just show us what the character is feeling. Now, the trick with this is to find really good reference. So that's the first place to start. Find amazing reference and that have a lot of energy to them, or a lot of personality to them, and break it up. Study how all of the different parts of the face are working. Break up your analysis of the brows, the eyelids, the teeth, the lips, how much teeth you would see, what's happening with the jaw, and in some cases it's also the way that the head is tilted. So if it's leaning forward or tilted sideways, that also will help indicate what the character is feeling. Now, for the essay, what you guys need to do is you need to find 2 comic artists or famous artists that are very good at doing facial expressions, and you need to talk about what they've introduced into their pieces which has inspired you or which you find appealing. Now, you can talk about the way that they've constructed the facial expressions. You should reference as much as possible. So, at least a couple of pieces from each of your artists. You can just copy and paste those images into your essay if you like, and talk about the way that it's constructed, the way that they're using the flow, the way that what the character is feeling, and how that relates to the way that the artist has actually constructed these poses. And then do the same thing with your pieces. Talk about a couple of your pieces and what you were thinking when you were constructing these expressions, what your character was feeling, how the muscles worked in the face that would drive this facial expression. I really want to hear about how you've analyzed the expression and tried to replicate it on your 3D character. Go into some detail about the eyes, thinking of the way that the brows are working with the lids, where the lids are cutting through the pupils, and all of that stuff that we've mentioned in the lecture, in this presentation now, that should be in your essay. Okay, but it's all about studying a couple of artists that you really like, learning from what they've done, and how you've implemented what they've done into your work. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.